Hello, everyone. I'm Debbie Nolan with Henrico Recreation and Parks, and welcome today to the curious world of parrots. Today, we're going to go on a journey through the world of parrots, an overview of how they're like us, how they're not like other birds, and also their origins, and then specifics on their conformation body parts, what they eat, what they like to eat, different types of parrots, and how they communicate, even, and how they could be a good companion for you or perhaps not. So, as we go through this journey, I'll be able to share different information, facts that are very good to know as well. So, facts and tips. So, as we start today, again, we'll talk about how parrots communicate, how you can communicate with other parents as well, and the big thing to remember about parrots is that they're loud, they're messy, they're highly energetic, they take special food and special vet care, they need huge cages, and they need plenty of time out of those cages as well, and lots of attention and lots of toys because they can tear up a toy in like 5 minutes. And they're just like a human child and have the intelligence of a child as well. And we will talk more about that. I've had parrots beginning when I was very young from parakeets. What we know as parakeets or keets are really budgeriggers, and they're from Australia originally. Many of our parrots come from that continent as well. So as we get ready to begin, let's talk about what is a parrot. Well, parrots come in all different shapes and sizes. They're some of the most intriguing and spectacular birds in the world. Their colors range from white to black and then every other color and pattern in the spectrum in between. They make excellent companions because they're flock animals and they have a desire to be a member of your flock. They're highly social and very, very, very intelligent. And some have the ability to talk, which is a big feature for many people. However, many that are of the species that are the best talkers may never say a word. So also that comes with a parrot as well. So when you know that, they can range from a palm-sized parrot all the way up to the hyacinth macaw of South America, which is about 40 inches long. So they'll run from palm size all the way up to that size. They originally lived in a wide range of habitats, ranging from humid rainforests in Central and South America to Africa and the Congo regions as well, to the Caribbean and other tropical environments throughout the world. And of course, we know not all parrots fly, so that's a surprise to many people. In New Zealand, there are several varieties of birds that do not fly because they're actually too heavy to fly. So a parrot is a lot of different things. The diversity within the parrot world is just like the diversity within the human world. Many size, shapes, colors, and abilities as well. So when we know that, then we can move on and think about what really makes parrots different from other birds. Now, when we look at that, parrots, generally there's a lot of different ways to designate how many different species of parrots there are. They're all part of the aves, A-V-E-S, category, and their subcategory is the pistache birds. Now they designate that type of birds from the passerine birds. Passerine birds are the birds that we see outside our windows every day, 3 toes forward, 1 toe back. Parrots have 2 toes forward, 2 toes back. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. But also in the pet bird industry, you'll see canaries, finches. They're all passerines as well. But parrots, totally different. So, what do they have in common with other birds? They fly. They have, of course, 2 legs, 2 wings. They are the only living animals that have feathers, and more to talk about those feathers in a moment. They have special beaks and tongues. Both types of birds do, and it's based on their lifestyle and how they eat. They have 4-chamber hearts just like humans do, but they also have hollow bones, and that enables them to fly, along with those feathers. So we'll also talk about that too. But they lay eggs to raise young ones, and knowing all of that, then we go, well, what makes them different? So let's look at what makes birds different from other types of birds. So we want to talk about some of the external characteristics of these birds. And in that, you can see a diagram there of, and this particular one's an African gray. But when you look at the diagram, you can see the technical names of different aspects of the bird. The feathers themselves all have, the wing feathers are primaries, then they have secondaries right above, and then the shoulder feathers. All of these feathers they all have a function that enables them to fly. So very specific on the feathers, and we'll talk a little bit more about them in a moment. They also have very specific beaks. They have also the best eyesight in the animal kingdom. That's their critical sense of, most critical sense when we look in terms of hearing, smelling, and so forth. Their vision is probably the most critical that they have within the wild. Their ability to see accurately at a long distance and the ability to fly, and then they see an enhanced color too. So they see in color, but some colors are more vivid than others. And you'll find if you're ever a parent or you're ever around parrots that they have very distinct likes and dislikes in their colors. Their eyeballs themselves, and let's talk about their eyes first. The eyeballs themselves are very large in comparison to the size of their head. They have eyes that can operate independently, and they also have one eye on one side of their head and one eye on the other side of their head. So they have very poor depth perception because of that. But the eye itself doesn't have a lot of movement, so they have to move their head. And so oftentimes that's why you'll see a parrot turn its head to the side. Often it's very much similar to when you see a robin looking for a worm outside. The robin will hear the worm and then turn its head sideways to get a good look at it before it snatches it. Parrots are the same way there, so there's another characteristic where they're similar. One thing that's really unique about a parrot is that they have a third inner eyelid. Now they only close the upper and lower eyelid to sleep. That's the external eyelid. The internal one is called a nictitating membrane, and it opens and closes so that when the bird flies, it protects the eye itself from debris or floating objects as they're flying, and it just protects the eyeball itself for the bird. So it's transparent, and it just sweeps across the eye, clearing it as they're flying and so forth. They don't have very good night vision, so most parrots go to bed at dusk, and when they do that, they settle in a tree branch somewhere, and we're going to talk about how birds don't fall out of trees when they're nesting. So compared to final on the eyes themselves, they can see more colors and distinguish them than humans, and they can see a wider range of colors as well because they can distinguish UV light as well. So the eyes themselves are very expressive in parrots because they have the ability to pin their iris. They can make it go down very small when they get excited, or it can be opened very wide when they're totally relaxed. So that's often an indicator, especially in an Amazon parrot, of when maybe you should leave the bird alone for a few minutes so he can calm down or he or she can calm down. So the eyes themselves, very, very, very important. Now, when we look at ears, now when you see this picture, you'll see the Senegal parrot just below the feathers. You can see his ear is covered. Now, they don't have an external ear like humans do, but they have an ear hole. Every bird does, and it's usually located in that area just beyond the corner of their eye. And so in the African gray there to the side, you can see it a little bit to the right of, or the left of his eye there, just behind the light color spot. And then with the yellow nape, it's just beyond the edge too. Most of the time, some people don't even realize birds have ears. They know they hear, but they just don't think about how that ear works. So they have the ear openings. Um, that is very, very important to a bird's existence in the wild. They have to be able to hear danger coming. So they have a very refined range of sounds that they can hear. Um, they're less sensitive to really high registers and really low registers, but they can really hear fluctuations or changes in your pitch than humans can. So it's very good to know that. And to know that the ability here to hear also enables flock members, because birds are flock animals in the wild. They live in large communities of other like-minded birds, and so there's always a watchbird or two out there. When they see danger, they'll call it out, so you have to be able to hear that. Their very life depends on that in the wild. Here in the domesticated environment, your parrot is going to want to know where you are and what you're doing. So you need to always let your flock member know, hey, I'm going to go to the back of the house for a while. I'll be back in a minute. And then that way they won't call for you continually going, where did you go? I don't know where you are. So because they're flock animals, that will happen. Remember, I said they're loud. They're going to call for you if you don't let them know where you're going. So thinking about that, they also feathers. Feathers are very unique in the birds. There's three basic kinds of feathers on a bird. They have down feathers. That's the little fluffies. We think of a down jacket. It's made out of the fluffies, usually of a goose or a duck. All birds have down feathers. They really help them regulate its temperature, the bird's temperature. You have contour feathers, and they're all of the feathers that cover the head and the body. They also help streamline the bird, because by tightening those feathers in, the bird is able to fly more streamlined. So they tighten the feathers as they fly. Birds often fluff them up in the evenings when they're ready to relax and they're feeling comfortable. So they'll fluff those feathers as well. And then you have flight feathers and tail feathers. And they're stiffer and they're longer than the contour feathers, and they move through the air and enable the bird to fly. So it takes all three types of feathers for the bird. When you know that, they keep their skin from getting wet as well. And it also allows the colors, the bright colors, allow the birds to basically camouflage themselves. Remember, they're from tropical areas originally, so there's a lot more colorful foliage. African gray is kind of like the antithesis for that, but if you think about it, in Africa, it's a little bit duller palette than it is in some of the more tropical areas. So when you keep that in mind, you can also tell if a bird is not feeling well, because they will fluff their feathers up. So large range of actions with the feathers. So it's not as simple as hair on humans. They serve a multitude of functions for each bird. Now, in the bird world, or in the companion world, birds like baths, and so therefore they either like to take a bath in their brand new water dish that you give them, or they like to be sprayed with a misting bottle, not hard direct spray, but a misting type spray. So that helps keep their feathers healthy. And also in some of the species like cockatoos and African grays, they have a lot of dander, and that helps flatten that down to keep it clean. The ends of the feathers erode off on those two species, so it creates that chalky-like substance that you'll see. The other species don't have that, but all birds need a bath. It keeps their feathers healthy, and not all birds have a preen gland that helps them distribute oil over the feathers. And so Amazons do not, but African grays do, and then other species do, macaws as well. So kind of a broad overview of those ideas. You can also tell if a bird's been stressed, because even the feathers, it's kind of like fingernails in humans. The fingernails can show stress bars in them, and feathers can do the same if the bird has had poor nutrition for a while, or if if they've just been in a situation where it was stressful for them. It will show up just like people will have hair fall out. Now, one other thing that's unique about feathers is birds molt, M-O-U-L-T, each year. And when they molt, they get a whole brand new set of feathers when that happens. So when they are in the process of molting, they don't just drop every feather all at one time. So they'll lose one primary on the right wing. And then when that one grows out, they'll lose the primary on the left wing. So they alternate sides so that they are always able to fly and that they're always able to have balance. So most people that have had parrots for a while, I have lots and lots of feathers. I could probably build 3 or 4 birds out of all the feathers that I have because you just can't throw those things away. They're beautiful. So when you look at that, so one other thing that makes parrots unique is the shape of their beak. And when you look at the shape of your beak, you can see that that is why oftentimes parrots are called hook bills. You can see that big hook in their bill. Usually a parrot beak is short and wide and the upper mandible curves over top. Now they have a hinged beak, meaning they can open their beak way wider than those pictures represent right there, so that they're able to crack nuts and so forth in the wild to get their meals. Now, the passerine birds, such as finches, canaries, and our outdoor birds, they're all soft bills because they have short, straight beaks, no curves in them. So birds have these beaks that are designed to break up open shells. You can see the hyacinth macaw here in the middle of the picture. That, remember, that was the largest bird. Those birds also are very, 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 very unusual to have. You're going to usually see them in zoos and places like that. And even more unusual to see is the black palm cockatoo there as well. Those are very unique birds. They're very unusual. You usually don't see that in private ownership. Occasionally, maybe here or there. The other bird is a macaw, and that particular one is a macaw mutation. It looks like a calico macaw. It could be any one of a number of them. They've created these different mutations of macaws by breeding different color lines together, like a scarlet macaw and a blue and gray, or a military macaw and a scarlet macaw. So a large number of different types of variations of color patterns in macaws in particular. So the beak determines their diet. So like I mentioned, nuts, fruits with really thick shells. They're really agile with that beak. You would really be surprised because that is their third foot. Parrots oftentimes don't like to fly unless they have to. They love to crawl around. So from their cages, they'll crawl up and down trees if you have a play tree for them, that type of thing. In the wild, of course, they do all of that. But they also use that beak for really delicate things like grooming their feathers, grooming their toenails, their children, their babies and so forth. Very, very amazing tools. The beak itself is made out of keratin, just like your toenails and fingernails. And the beak grows over time. The birds keep them healthy they'll eat and then they'll rub their beak to clean it and also to keep it. I always laugh. I have one, I say he keeps it sharp so that he can grab me. But it's actually they keep them sharp to be able to break in and eat their food. But they also have a very agile tongue. People don't think about this. Now, one of my birds has a big habit of putting food in her lower beak under her tongue, and then she'll fly to a different part of the room and sit there and eat it. And I laugh and say, is that like running with scissors? I'm not sure. But she's always carrying food around in her beak to eat with it. The other parrots do the same thing. They use their tongues to manipulate the seeds or position the nuts and hold them. They stick their tongues out sometimes, so they also have that same personality will come through, and you can actually train them. If you stick your tongue out at them, they'll stick it out at you. It's a communication, interrelation play thing. So The beaks are very, very, very unique and should have healthy respect from humans. I think one of the very first things that people who are not familiar with birds will do, will they'll walk right up on them and stick their hand out, and that's usually asking to get bit. Let's talk about biting for a second. If you ever have a bird in your life, and I do not differentiate in between a parakeet, a cockatiel, or a larger bird, and even canaries and finches will bite on you. Now, you're going to have a bite in the process. It's just part and parcel. But there are different kinds of bites. Is the bird, there's two ways to look at it. One is a warning bite. The other is put your hand here so that I can step up on it. So, like I said, that's their third foot. They use that in climbing. So, oftentimes, they're just using it to move to another place, meaning it being the beak. Or is it an actual bite because I've warned you, and now I mean business. So, also, when you first get a parrot, too, you want to give them breathing space. You want to let them acclimatize to your environment. And so, therefore, they're going to bite when they're scared or feel threatened or alarmed. Most of the time, a bird will not do that. Like I said, they're going to warn you. And once again, you can look at their eyes. If they're pinning those eyes, they're warning you also. So, a wide variety of communication tools to be able to not get bitten. And then sometimes the bite will happen accidentally. Like one of my birds likes to ride on my shoulder. When my shirt slipped, he grabbed my ear so that he could not fall off my shoulder. Well, that was very exquisite, but what happens when you get bite from a bird? You can't react because sometimes they'll discover that that is just a lot of fun to get a reaction out of you. So you always want to stay calm and not react and not say mean things to the bird, because they will pick up anything that you say that is done with expression really loud. So you want to be careful what you say, because if you use bad language, they're going to learn bad language. So you do not want to do that, because usually birds will outlive their owners in a lifetime and have many, many owners throughout their lifetime. And we're going to talk about how long these birds can live in a few moments. So going from their beak to their feet. Now, birds have, as I mentioned earlier, very specific feet. When you look at the pictures on the right, those are the types of feet that passerine birds or our outdoor birds or canaries or finches have. 3 toes forward, 1 toe back. Now, parrots have the picture that's on the left. Now, that's the 2 toes forward, 2 toes back. Now, that's because parrots use their feet not only to climb, but to clasp things and hold them. They are the only creature that can pick something up and bring it up to their beak and eat. The word itself, zygodacal, means yoked, Y-O-K-E-D. It's actually a Greek word. But that arrangement is very common in any kind of bird that would live in trees and clamber up and down through foliage. Like I mentioned earlier, most parrots like to walk around, climb up and down, almost before they'll fly. Actually, it's almost like flying is at the last moment for them. So the big thing to remember is that the 2 toes forward, 2 toes back. And one thing interesting too about their toes is there's a different number of bones in each one of those toes. So it's not readily apparent, but you can see that perching for a bird, any type of bird, but a parrot bird in particular, you need a certain size perch that's appropriate to the side of the bird as well in their living environment, so that they will be able to not have too narrow a grip and not have too wide of a grip. And they're on those feet 24 hours a day. So all of the birds in the parrot class have those zygodacal feet. Very unique to them. So let's talk a little bit about their internal characteristics. Now, the picture on your left is the skeleton of the bird. And so, as I mentioned earlier, one of the things that allows parrots to fly, or any bird to fly, is the fact they have hollow bones. Now, in that picture, you can see why you can harken back to their ancestry. And we're going to talk about that in a few moments too. But they really look like a dinosaur right there. Uh, but also, that gives you an idea of what a bird looks like once you remove the feathers and remove the skin. You can see their structure. They actually have a really long neck, and you can see that the beak itself is part of the skeleton, but it is hinged, as I mentioned earlier, so that they can eat more better. When you look at the picture on the right side, that kind of shows you another element of the birds. Their digestive system is totally different from ours. Their equivalent of a stomach is called the proventriculus, and it's a long tube. They eat, the food goes into the proventriculus and then flows into their intestines, and of course flows from there. Do birds poop a lot? Yes. It's part and parcel of parrots. Now, believe it or not, different species poop at different rates. Now, you didn't know you were going to get information like that here, but it's true. And also, what you feed them differentiates on how often they poop. Now, the poop itself has three distinct parts. It has the urine, it has the solid part, and then some type of other fluid around binding the two together. And as parrot owners, you often learn right away that it's like reading tea leaves. You watch the poop to tell the health of each bird that you have, and each bird is a little different. In that picture, you can also see that group of little round-looking sacs underneath the proventriculus and the other organs, and those are air sacs within the bird itself that helps the bird be light enough to fly. So even within the the body itself, not just the structure and the shape of the wings, how the feathers work, but the bird's body itself has those additional air sacs in addition to lungs that allows it to fly. So when you look at that, that's even more amazing on how a bird can actually fly. I know oftentimes we look at airplanes and wonder how they fly. Well, they're actually modeled in many ways after the bird. So when we go to how do birds fly, when we see how the bird flies, the wings themselves are like the airfoil. Now, many of us, probably all of you out there at some time or another in your life, have been on an airplane. Usually I end up with a wing seat, it seems. But when you look out over the wing of the airplane, you can see that the front of the wing is larger, and then it tapers off to a real fine point behind, where the shape of the wing is very similar to a bird. So, bird's wing. So when you see that, the wings act as an airfoil. That's the same shape as in an airplane wing. And it's used also in the wings, blades, and sails of other different objects that we use to fly with. Air flows faster over the top of the wing, and beneath it's slower. So it gives you greater pressure below the wing because the air travels faster above it. So that enables the bird to create lift. So more pressure beneath the wings creates that lift. The air flowing over allows them to fly. Then they flap their wings, and that gives them momentum. So there's a whole principle involved in that, and it's Bertinelli's principle of flying. But the bigger thing to remember is that the air itself flowing over the wings and the shape of the wings creates that. So that like we mentioned earlier, it's the plumage itself in the bird, how it's arranged, the air sacs in the body, all of those things, the physiology of the bird itself that allows it to fly. So it's a miracle of nature that we took and turned into airplanes over time. So it's amazing when you watch a bird fly, especially they soar, and then they also use that flap to get higher, to get lower, and when they go to land, they sweep the wings forward right in front of their face to be able to land and not go rolling. So very, very interesting. So that's just a quick overview. Remember, their bones are hollow as well, and they use their tail as a rudder to be able to control where they go. So, with that thought, and we touched on this a little bit, how long do birds live? Well, we all know that the bigger a bird gets, and if you don't, the bigger the bird gets, the longer it lives. So, a smaller bird, such as a canary, can live 7 to 10 years or longer, and finches are the shortest lived in the passerine family. They have higher metabolism, and birds have a high metabolism. That's why we talk about people eating like a bird. They eat, when we say people eating like a bird, we say they don't eat much. But the fact of the matter is a bird eats a lot. It takes a lot of energy for a bird to be able to fly and for a bird be able to support their life because they fly, all of these different things we've mentioned. It just takes a lot of high energy for them to do that. So they eat a lot of different things that we'll talk about in a second. So the large parrots, the Amazons and the macaws, can live anywhere from 80 to 100 years old. There's actually documentation of Winston Churchill had a macaw, and that bird is still alive and now in a zoo in London. And of course, he had that bird during World War II, and it has survived all this time. And much as many other parrot owners have found, you need to take care of a bird in your will or make arrangements for where your bird will go if you pass over the human rainbow bridge, because some birds can have 2 or 3 family owners during their lifetimes. So keeping that in mind, the smaller birds can of course live 20, 30 years, lovebirds about 10 years. So you go from the higher end of the spectrum downward, and it just kind of flows normally. With good care and good environment, birds can live quite a while and through many generations of one family. It's not unusual for a parrot to have had, maybe 3 or 4 different members and generations of a family as their companions and caretakers throughout the years. So when you keep that in mind, it's amazing to know that they can span those generations like that, and that they can interact and be part of those families all of those years and have those relationships with the next generation from when they were children and older as well. I find that fascinating. So one thing to keep in mind with how long parrots live is parrots are not a impulse purchase with people. You are making a major investment in responsibility and care for a parrot. Like I mentioned earlier, it's like a human child because they're as smart as a 5 to 7-year-old child stuck in the terrible twos all the time. And they take the same kind of nurturing and stimulus that a young child would have. They also take the same eyeball and meaning taking care of, keeping up with, teaching. They're very intelligent. They take intellectual and stimulation as well. They are a major commitment. You can't just go off on vacation. You have to have someone, either the birds come with you or you have someone who you trust that comes in and interrelates with your birds as well. So they're not an impulse buy. It's a responsible choice you make. You should really research it very in depth before you make a decision to buy a bird. Oftentimes people will buy a smaller parrot first, such as a cockatiel or a parakeet, but oftentimes it doesn't happen that way, and in your family you might be the one that inherits your grandmother's African gray. And what you need to do is know the most you can, and know that there are plenty of in social media outlets where you can interrelate with other people with the same kind of birds, dealing with the support that you'll find from there will help you deal with any of the types of things that come down. And I found on Facebook too that you're dealing with people from all over the world with birds like this, and so it's amazing. It's that that the love of aviculture flows throughout the world is amazing. So when you keep that in mind, that's a long-term commitment. They live a long time, and they're intelligent, and they depend on you when you take them into your care. So always remember that. And so thinking in terms of that, one of the first people that draws people to birds, one of the first things that draw people to birds is their ability to talk. Now, I mentioned earlier that not all birds talk, even though they have the ability to do it. It's a personality thing. Just like we have introverts and extroverts, even within the extroverted birds, like the Amazons, you have some that prefer to whistle songs or sing, and some that prefer to talk like a motor mouth. Then in the African grays, you tend to have a bird that's more introspective and tends to take in the situation. All birds like to talk when you're talking on the telephone. It does not matter. Every parrot will do that because they have their 2 cents to put in. And plus, again, they're social animals, and they're talking because you're talking. They don't see you talking to someone else, so they figure they need to talk back. So they're not, they have an unusual organ called the strynx, and it's located in the breast. It's very much like our larynx. They're able to control the two halves of the strynx to be able to manipulate their breath and their tongue to be able to make noises and mimic what we say. Now, birds oftentimes they will take some time to pick up things that you're saying. Other birds will pick them up immediately, meaning phrases. Um, I saw recently somebody making the joke that they had been working with their parrot like in September and October and November for the bird to sing Christmas songs in particular, and the bird didn't sing them in Christmas, but then started like in the summertime singing them. So that often happens because they are sentient creatures, and they're going to do it in their own way, just like we do. Now, they create the sounds by manipulating the shape and depth of that movement within their trachea, or the strynx. They're also not the only birds that are capable of speech. Starlings, ravens, and minor birds all can speak as well. And crows can speak. So in 1995, they actually documented a budgerigar, what we know of as a parakeet. His name was Puck, and Guinness World Records said that he had the largest vocabulary of any bird, and he had about 1,700 words in his vocabulary. Now, the bigger the bird gets, the easier they are to understand. Parakeets have real little voices, and when you hear them talk, it's at a high pitch, and it's much of a little bit lower voice. But most of your larger parrots, particularly the big three being able to talk, and we'll talk about that in a moment, they all will mimic their owners. So oftentimes, like I mentioned, over their lifetime, they'll have different family members, and they will continue to use different voices for the same words and phrases and so forth. So they'll often speak to you in another family member's voice or your voice, and it is very disconcerting sometimes when you hear certain things. Now, some birds will also key in on sounds, microwave beeping, the fire alarm beeping, something that they'll hear on television. My African gray loves the sound that the ice maker makes when you push the glass against the thing and it drops the crunched ice down. It makes that crunched ice noise. And it took me about 6 months to figure out where she got it from. We thought it was like when you shake a couple pills out of a bottle, but nope, it's the ice maker. And so anytime we walk over to the refrigerator, she makes that noise. So they have household things that they really like, but it's very interesting to note that birds in the wild do not mimic unusual sounds. It's just our companion parrots within our home environments. Also, and I thought this was really interesting as I was doing my research on this, in African greys, they said that right-footed parrots also have a larger vocabulary than a left-footed parrot. Now, they have all parrots are right-footed and left-footed as well. They have a right dominant side, left dominant side, just like people do. So I found that incredibly interesting. Also, they can put quite a bit of volume behind what they say, and sometimes some parrot vocalizations can be heard up to 2 miles away. So, the type of bird that you would choose to have as a member of your household, you need to be very diligent in your research because birds are loud and they may not fit into an apartment community. Uh, Oftentimes, birds are rehomed because the person picked the wrong type of bird for their environment to become their companion, and they end up having to be rehomed. So keep in mind, every bird is loud. It does not matter what type it is. Some are louder than others. Amazons are very loud. Macaws are even louder, and they all vocalize at dusk because that's the time where they're all catching up with what everybody did through the course of the day. So, when you think about everything that the birds communicate about, they also communicate with their feather crests if they have a crest like a cockatoo or a cockatiel. They will produce all kinds. They cannot say certain uh, verbiage, certain vowels because they take the use of lips to say. So when you were to name your bird, you wouldn't want to name them with one of those vowels. So oftentimes you can work with your bird. You're going to tell right away what they're able to say and what they're able not to say. So it's a process. The birds all will lurk over time and learn to talk. Perhaps, like I said, one of my parrots likes to whistle songs. That particular parrot can do the Redskins fight song. It can do the call to the racetrack for the horses, Happy Birthday, two, three other songs, Mulberry Bush, that type of thing. And of course, his favorite thing to do is to mix them all up. And then it's like America's Got Talent. It's like, which song are you singing when? So you have to just kind of figure it out. Most birds can have a vocabulary of anywhere from 100 to 5, 6, 700 phrases as well. One of my birds, they can say 75 different distinct phrases and about 200 words that I've documented. And then they're constantly learning new things throughout the course of time. So remember, they're loud, they can learn to talk, but they might choose not to. So one of the things that's really important in aviculture to remember about parrots is, and I've touched briefly on this, all parrots were wild caught originally are wild birds. The pet trade, because of the demand on parrots, because they became so popular over time, it used to be very unusual to see people that had birds or parrots as a companion animal. Now, companion birds are third most kept companion animal in the United States. But what happened was parrots are cavity nesting birds, meaning they like to put their nests in the cavities of trees. Poachers would go out and pull the babies out of the nests and export them to other countries. And what it resulted in was many of the birds have, out of the almost 400 varieties of parrots, about 100 of them are endangered species because of that. Now, in the late 60s, early 70s, internationally the countries got together and created what's called the CITES Treaty, which is the International Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. And this is not just parrots, but it's also flora and fauna. And so now, after 1975, no birds are imported anymore. My yellow-nape Amazon was one of the last birds to come through and immigrate in through California through quarantine. He had a leg band and I was able to trace where he came from. He was one of the last ones in the 70s to come into the United States. Now all birds that are available within the U.S. are domestically raised and are no longer imported. So that's from 1975 onward. Now there's still, for certain varieties of birds, certain types of birds or certain species, some of them do require permitting, some of them do require licensing to be able to have, and of course that's going to be the more endangered out of those 100 ones that I mentioned, which include those hyacinth macaws, which included those black palm cockatoos that we talked about earlier. So something to keep in mind that has changed the nature of aviculture in the United States. So now some things did you know about parrots? So maybe you did, maybe you didn't. But what's fun to know is, and some of these I may have already mentioned, but we'll just kind of glide over them fairly quickly. Again, in here, the top bird is the pygmy parrot from New Guinea, and they're palm size. So you can see from the size of the fingers the relationship of the size of the bird. Hand size, palm size. And of course, the birds flying beneath are hyacinth macaws. And you can see the wingspan, they're huge birds. They're beautiful, huge parrots. And of course, they can live 75 to 100 years, like we mentioned already. Oh, Charlie, the blue and gold macaw. She was the oldest recorded parrot. She is the oldest reported parrot. And I thought I had this written somewhere. And she was hatched in 1899. And in 2011, she was 112. And she now lives in the London Zoo. She's still there, as a matter of fact. So I did think it was interesting that even though parrots are really brightly colored, they lay white eggs, as opposed to our outdoor birds, who the coloration of the eggs are often a way to identify who's in that nest. But parrots, all of the eggs are white. So did you know? So also, it's very interesting to know that when we were talking about the exterior features of the parrot's feathers weigh more than its skeleton. Remember, their bones are hollow. They can see in color. We talked about that, and they see more colors than we can see because they can see the ultraviolet wavelengths. Let's see here. Also, parrots are the only birds, like I mentioned, that can pick up food with their feet and lift it up to their beaks to eat. The closest living relatives to birds now are crocodiles and alligators. The biting I can see, but the biting ability perhaps. Scientists do believe that, as most people know, that birds evolved from dinosaurs, and they're based on similarities through the skeletons. The lower picture is a fossil, and you can actually see the feathers in that fossil of that bird. So they now are pretty sure that they did descend from them. They were meat-eating dinosaurs, even though they were birds at that time. Also, they found fossils in Europe that date back to 55 million years ago, or the Cretaceous period within our history. So that's always very interesting to know. They've been around a long time. And their evolutionary process, other than to get feathers pretty much over their whole body, they're still pretty close to what they look like in dinosaur form. You can really see it in a bird's feet. When you look at their feet, you can see their reptile inheritance, I guess you can say. So also looking at some other did you knows, here we have two of the most common pictures of the two of the most common birds that we see frequently, which is the parakeet or budgerigger or keet, all the same bird, and cockatiels. Cockatiels are wonderful pets. I had a cockatiel, a cinnamon cockatiel, and his name was Paco, and Paco lived to be 23 years old. He was amazing. And I love birds, but once I had Paco, I was never not have another parrot with me. So talking in aviculture about what birds eat. In the wild, they rely on seeds as foods, fruits, nuts. Some birds specifically eat just fruit and nectar, or also they'll eat small insects. Some birds will actually eat small animals, just depends. Mice and that sort of things. Uh, Cockatoos, as opposed to all of the other parrots, usually only come in, their plumage is usually only comes in black, gray, or white. And as I mentioned, New Zealand had a lot of unusual parrots, including the largest parrots that weigh the most and don't fly because they don't have hollow bones. Actually, that particular, I've seen a lot of information on those birds recently because they're very mischievous and they're starting to, they've been almost extinct and they're starting to make a huge comeback now. Uh, Parrots mate for life. A lot of people did not realize that parrots are monogamous. Uh, the female chooses the parrot, and then oftentimes they stay together unless something happens to one of the other of the mates. So in current aviculture, now like I said, I've kept parrots for a long, long time, and originally when I was younger, we fed them seed, you give them some treats, that type of thing, and water. Now they're like any other companion animal. We give them a lot of vegetables, a lot of not different just seeds, but a wide variety of food to keep the birds healthy. Small on the seed side, but big on the pelleted food side because the pelleted foods give them stronger nutrition because it's just contained in the pellets. So there's a wide variety of those out there for you to choose from to feed your parrot. Um, Treats, they love popcorn. So at least that's it. I go to the movies and bring popcorn back for the parrots to have as a treat. They also still love nuts, but you have to look out for your birds in captivity because you have to have, the biggest thing is that you'd like for to have your birds to have 4 to 5 hours of out of the cage time. Some people have longer. Oftentimes I like to have them come out at different times because they can be very jealous of each other. Other things to think about with birds include some other special things. You know, when you think about birds, the birds are on their feet 24 hours a day. So why do you see a bird that has one standing on one foot? Well, they're giving that foot rest. It needs a little rest. Have you ever wondered how the birds don't fall out of a tree? And this is not just parrots, but outdoor birds and other passerine birds. When they put their feet around the perch and then they relax down, they have a tendon in their feet that locks their feet around the perch. So when they're settled down like that, it locks it in place. Now, the minute they wake up and straighten their legs up, the tendon releases and they can fly off. So it keeps them anchored in place. So it's a very unusual adaptive ability for that to happen. Birds also like to stick their head under part of their wing, and that's pretty much like pulling the covers over your head for a bird. Very much they'll do that, but not often. It just depends on the bird. Many of them will tuck their head like that to sleep. Oftentimes, they'll get into such deep sleep that I can hear one of mine will fall off the perch. It's just slipped. So they get into very, 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 very deep sleep, just like people. Another thing that the birds do that's really unusual, and you'll know you have a truly contented bird, is they get in that position, whether they're sitting on one foot or two, and the legs are locked in place, and they will do what's called grinding their beak. Now, this is not to keep the beak honed down by any means. It's just a reflex they do that's just comforting to them. It's like a little raspy sound, and they'll grind it back and forth, and that just means they're happy and content. So one thing to keep in mind, if you hear that, that's all that means. Now, the other thing about having their eyes one on one side of their head and one on the other, they can actually sleep with one eye open, and that's because of their heritage of always wanting to be prepared for the worst in the wild. So that alert to keep an eye out for predators for sure. So oftentimes they say a pet bird should have 10 to 12 hours of sleep at night. That's very similar to a child as well, like we mentioned before. Some birds like to stay up with you and sleep later in the morning. Other birds, they want to go to bed. One of mine will say good night when it's ready to go to bed, and she'll continue to repeat that until I put her to bed. The others are ready to go to bed at 9 o'clock. So here's the big one everybody wants to know about. First question is always, can they talk? How do they fly? And how smart are parrots? Well, they're some of the most intelligent creatures on Earth for sure. We talked about how much they can talk and how that factors in with their intelligence, but they also can use the words and phrases that they know appropriately and contextually. And in other words, they can say, would you like a treat this morning? And you come in at night. Would you like a kiss tonight? They understand night and dark. They understand when you leave and come back. They understand that. So when I leave my birds in the morning, I'll say, goodbye, you be good, I'll see you after work. And they know I'm coming back, because what they don't have is a good sense of time. So if you leave and you're gone a sense of time, unless you give them an interrelationship, they'll think maybe you're not going to come back. So when I'm out of town, the people that I have watch my birds oftentimes will call me just so that I can talk to them for a minute, so they know they're okay. So keeping that in mind, they actually discovered that the birds also not only can be as smart as a 4 to 7-year-old child, but they can use the same logic as a 4-year-old, meaning they can be very mischievous, they can associate birds. They've done studies on birds. It's probably the most famous one is through Harvard and Irene Pepperberg and Alex and Athena and Griffin, the African greys. And they work with the different studies. Actually, I was with a webinar with her in it the other day, and she was saying that due to COVID, that their research had to change slightly, and they're in a different area. They can only work one person with the birds at a time, but they work on the system where the bird watches one person give someone else the same treat, and then the bird sees what's going to happen. So there is a scientific name for that. I think it's a companion example. And so then you work with the bird to do the same thing. Now those birds all understand colors, understand shapes, understand food, and understand how to ask for it contextually, any of those things, and understand the reward system out of that as well. So very, very, very interesting area to read more about. Oftentimes they'll know all these words but not necessarily put them in the right order, or perhaps, like I said, the one bird will be creative in what they do. In captivity, when it's very interesting that if a bird is taught things in captivity and they're released out to the wild, they'll often teach other birds how to do certain things that they learned in captivity. So Project Perry, which is here in Virginia, is actually a refuge for birds. A lot of times parrots are willed to there or surrendered there and also rescued from there. And a wonderful place. Everyone should check it out at some point. An excellent area to give donations to perpetuate, if you love parrots, to help perpetuate their care. Big area to go at, but those birds will continue to train other birds right there within their refuge. They'll continue to talk and continue to do all of those things in that environment as well. So earlier I said I would mention the smartest birds. Well, the African gray parrot is considered the genius of the bird world. All of the Amazons are a close second, and then macaws and cockatoos and budgies or budgerigars or parakeets, and then conures, quakers, and lovebirds kind of all fall in the same category. So oftentimes people really focus on the grays and on the Amazons. I like to call them the introverts and extroverts of the bird world. The Amazons are like, ah, I'm here, it's me. And then the grays are like, I'm going to wait and see what you can show me of you and step back. So oftentimes, uh, they're very, very, very highly intelligent. I mentioned earlier that you can't just get a bird and not interact with it. You have to work on nurturing them each day, interaction with them on a daily basis, toys, lots of toys and enrichment, foraging toys, keep a bird amused. A lot of just flat out cardboard boxes are great. They love tearing up cardboard, so all of those things are great. So, as we move towards the end of our presentation, I'm just going to talk about the three main birds in particular, the three main pet trade parrots in particular. The yellow-nape Amazon. So they're, as I mentioned, highly sought after for their talking ability. But yellow-napes have very, very, very strong personalities. They say if you can keep a yellow-nape, you can keep any kind of parrot because they can be mercurial in their temperament. Uh, Not every bird is a hand bird. Many of them just need a huge cage and their space. That's how my bird is. He's almost 40. He was one of the last wild caught ones, and he's very interactive and a lot of fun. But he will bite my finger instead of stepping up on it. But if I use a stick, he loves that. We will do all of that with each other. So it's all in each bird's nature to be different. And within each species, every bird has a different personality. So these green birds, they're called yellow nape because they have yellow on the back of their neck, at the nape of their neck. Their beaks are dark and their feet are dark. They can bond with one person, so you have to work really hard to keep them interacting with everyone so that they'll be socialized. But as I mentioned earlier, they warn you when they're getting excited so that you can take a giant step back. And one thing with them is they make everything a game. It's always fun and games with them. So they're a great, great, great addition to any family. And of course, they're very long lived as well. Good. Then we have the double yellow-headed Amazon. And they start with just a little bit of yellow on their head. And as the bird gets older, that yellow flows from the head all the way down to their shoulders. They have more red on their shoulder heads of their wings than the yellow nape does. But they have the same basic hues, that vivid green, blue in their primary feathers. Their vocal abilities are amazing, and probably I truly think that the gray and the double yellowhead are probably the two best speakers in my mind, just based on what I know personally. They love talking. You'll see on the internet, and you can Google it anytime, there are a lot of double yellowheads that sing opera or sing anything. They love singing. They love music. All birds love music. They especially love the vacuum cleaner. They love noise. They love interaction. So always remember that any bird, any parrot will be hormonal during breeding season, even if they're not laying eggs. So you always, with a bird, want to only pet them on their head or under their beak or on their cheeks. You don't want to stroke their backs because that will be way too exciting to them and stimulating. So double yellow-headed Amazons came from Central America and part of Mexico originally, and they're stocky and have a short tail. And just again, they're part of this. All of these birds are part of the CITES acts, but domestically raised, they're not. There's no particular rulings, permits, and so forth needed for them. There may be some state by state, but here in Virginia there are not. Let's see here. So also the other one in the Amazons that you see often is a blue front Amazon, and right there at the top of his cere, at the top of the nose, it's blue. Good. So the last one I'm going to talk about is the Timna African Gray, because that's what I have. Now most people think of The Congo African gray. The main differences between the two birds is the Congo is much larger bird and the coloration is much lighter, and they have a scarlet tail. A Timna, and they come from slightly different areas within the African continent originally. The Congos naturally come from that area, and then the Timnas a little bit further away from them, a little bit into uh, deeper into the middle of Africa. Now, the Timnas are much smaller. They're almost petite next to a Congo. They can get 11 to 12, 11 to 13 inches or so in length, and their plumage is a darker gray, and they have a maroon tail. And then their beak is horn colored on the top. Feet are dark. So they're very, very, very intelligent, and grays can be very nervous in environments, certain environments, and they can pluck their feathers just from being nervous natured. So the more interaction, nurturing, foraging, toys, interaction, all of those things with these birds helps prevent that. And Timnas tend to interact with all members of a family and not just one person, as some birds will. So that's kind of the general overview for today. A little bit of the birds in my flock. My double yellowhead Amazon had an accident at some point. Kermit broke her wing, and so she has one wing. She still thinks she can fly. That's okay. We all should believe we can fly. It's very releasing for us. That's JR. He is 40 years old. He is my legal immigrant from Mexico, and he's on the bottom of the two pictures there. And then my Timna, Ricky, is sitting on my shoulder in the one spot, and then sitting on right behind my head, which is her favorite other spot, because she likes to groom my hair, and she keeps my hair cut very short because she does that. So all three birds, very distinct personalities. Each of them have their own enclosures and large cages to live in. They do not live together. I do not recommend that for multiple parrots. Parrots are social animals. They need to have more than one around, and including you, to keep that interaction and to keep them engaged socially. That's just the nature. They're flock animals, so you need to have the flock, whether they're in the middle. Their best place to be is not in the kitchen proper, but because of the cooking smells and so forth, but also in the area where you most congregate, if you keep one in the house, or if you keep your flock members in the house. Which brings us to our final challenge. Now, in this challenge, I'm going to show you a video, and this video is Kermit. Kermit is very, very, very verbose. She talks a blue streak, and as I said, they're from Central and South America, double yellow-headed Amazon, and Kermit is already about 25 or 26. I am her third owner. JR, I'm his second owner. Ricky, I'm second owner with her too. So in this video, Kermit's going to be very gregarious. She's going to move around on the perch. As I mentioned earlier, parrots are right or left-handed. So watch the video and see which you think she is. She's going to say a whole bunch of phrases. See if you can identify what they were. They're very understandable. See if you can understand. Now, once you think you have the answers, post it to our Henrico Recreation and Parks Facebook page. That Facebook page is readily available. Just Google it if you don't have it already marked, and be sure to join it as well, because we have all kinds of really, really, really neat activities going on there. And also, you're going to want to subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. Our YouTube channel, it's not just learn how to DIY projects, activities for youth and crafts and creations, but also activities for you, yoga, Pilates, fitness, all types of things. So that YouTube channel is Henrico Recreation Parks, not and, but Recreation Parks. And we'll have those at the end of our production as well. So now get ready. Have you got your pen and pencil out? Get ready, because Kermit's going to talk to you now. Remember, you want to know if she's right or left footed, and you want to see how many phrases you can figure out she says.
Alright. Water. Come on, pretty boy. Come here, baby. Oh, I know. Right. Come on. Come on. Come on, pretty boy. Come here, baby. Oh.
And they all like a radio going on in their enclosure to keep them amused too. So they do learn from the radio as well. So always pick a channel that is a family channel to use as well. And once again, like I mentioned, Henrico Recreation and Parks, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Don't forget, and come to our Facebook page as well and join. We've got a lot of fun activities for you out there. Again, direct any questions towards the Facebook page if you have them, and I'll be glad to get back with you with answers. Thank you so much for viewing this today, and Kermit, JR, and Ricky enjoyed contributing to you as well. Thank you very much.